Since it's an intimate group, I thought we'd just get a quick sense of who's in the room, so it just helps our panelists here in terms of the perspective that they can provide that's relevant to all of you. We thought we'd get a sense of who's here. I'd open it with a few questions to our panelists, and then we'll open it up for questions from you sort of in between, so we won't wait all the way till the end. We'll get you involved in the middle of it all, and then we'll come back and just wrap up some additional perspectives from the panelists. So thank you for being here. It's been titled India at Crossroads. And so how many of you have any idea what we're going to talk about? Except for Raymond, who created this. Yeah, I think our panelists had the same feeling. What is this title? But let's get a quick sense of the audience. How many of you are familiar with India, have visited India, or fund India, or work in India? Nice. Okay. How many of you have not? We'll give you extra love. Okay, so everyone, pretty much. How many of you are social entrepreneurs? Social entrepreneurs? How many of you are funders? How many of you have traveled from India? Okay, great. That gives you guys good perspective. So India at Crossroads, how we've wanted to frame this is really imagine yourself as a country where you are seen and expected, and there's a lot of us that have aspirations that it will be a superpower. And if you think of some of the statistics, we're the world's largest democracy. We're a global leader in high tech. We're one of the leading importers of weapons. We've had a mission to Mars. And we're the third largest economy based on purchasing parity. On one side of this journey. And on another side of the journey is we have some of the worst development outcomes in the world in terms of malnutrition, in terms of maternal mortality, access to water. We have a lot of our population still based on agriculture, and Rikin will talk about some of that. And so really the point is, how can we possibly reach a superpower status without really addressing some of the development outcomes? And the folks that we have on the panel today have been doing some really great work behind moving us to a superpower, both in terms of development as well as the economy. And so I thought a fun opening question would be, so many label India as, if you were to think of an animal, they say India could be like an elephant. And so it could be an elephant that's dancing, or it could be an elephant that's a stampede. And so I wanted to ask a question of our panelists that if you were to pick an animal that represented India, from your perspective, what would that be and why? And why don't we start with Tim?
Oh boy, you're going to pick me.
No? Okay, or anyone.
The outsider in the group. Well, first,
Yeah.
I'll start with just a little bit about me so you can understand where I'm coming from. So if you haven't guessed, I'm not from India. I lead an organization called Landesa that works on land rights issues around the world, and about a third of our work is in India. We've been working in India for about 15 years. I lived in India for almost 5 years. While I'm not an Indian citizen, I'm a huge admirer of India, and it is, I think, my favorite country in the world. Perhaps most importantly, I'm married to an Indian, my wonderful wife and life partner. Grew up in India, and I have 4 kids, all with Indian names, all who fortunately look more like their mother than their father, and completely self-identify as Indians. So how does this qualify me to even speak to this? It actually doesn't, because the more I learn about India, the more I realize how much I don't know. So to the question, I have a very, very difficult time answering the question, because I don't think there's any one single animal that even comes close to capturing what India is, because it's a country of paradoxes. It has 2 faces, and Neera kind of pointed to them. So to say that it's either an elephant or a tiger or a dragon or a snail or whatever, it depends on what part of India you're looking at. So yeah, one of the world's largest economies in PPP terms, and a very fast-growing economy, a country with some of the leading businesses in the world, incredible talent pool at the top, as you all know, rightfully taking its place on the global stage. But yet, this other side, I mean, it's still has the largest number of poor people on the planet, and it's not just about its size either. In terms of percentages, India has about the same percentage of its population living under $2 a day as does sub-Saharan Africa. It performs horribly on the Social Progress Index, which I think just came out last week, 101st out of 130 countries or so, and just below Bangladesh and Cambodia. So how do you choose one animal that fits all of that? I'm at a loss.
Will you tell us also a little bit about the work that Landesa does and how you see that in the context of?
Yeah, sure. So in India, as in the world as a whole, 3/4 of the poorest people live in rural areas. They depend on land for their livelihoods, largely through agriculture. And the poorest of those poor actually don't have access to land. They don't own land. There's about 20 million rural households in India that are completely landless. There's another 50 or 60 million who are smallholders but don't actually fully legally own the land that they farm. And this is particularly true for women who are doing increasingly more of the farming. So making sure that those who depend on land have secure legal rights to their land is about giving them the opportunity to pull themselves up. And while India's making progress on that, we can talk about it later, there's still a long ways to go.
Rohini?
Yeah, I agree with Tim that it's hard to identify one animal. It's more like a whole zoo, you know. I can think of many animals that represent parts of India, but since you asked that question, I thought maybe I'd like to say peacock. You know, first of all, just beautiful. The amazing beauty in my country, physical and, you know. Also, peacocks are good at frugal innovation, you know. They adjust to many places, urban and rural. I think they like to walk a lot and peck at the ground, but when push comes to shove, they can fly. So, and they're so closely associated with the monsoon and the rain, and they know how to delight in it and live by it. So I would say peacock. But thanks for depressing us so much, Tim, about India. There's a lot of good that's happening. Never in human history has there been this scale of problems happening at such warp speed. Okay, 1.2 billion people, all coming, kicking and screaming into the 21st century. Sometimes from the 16th, you know, straight into the 21st. But just there is a lot of, and many people here who are working at the grassroots in India for a very long time. And I think many good things are happening alongside the obvious problems that we have. And I think it's a huge opportunity for a country this size with problems of this nature to really innovate, making rapid change at scale for the right reasons. I'm not so sure about being a superpower. Superpower for what? But I think a lot of good is happening. And through my own house, because of my husband Nandan, 100 entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs pass through our doors every day, and just the energy that they have, the ideas that they have, and the passion and the optimism that they have, I think keeps us all going. So lots of good happening in India, huge challenges, but a big opportunity.
And where, Rohini, have you focused your
So
efforts in terms of this?
I started working in the primary education sector through the Pratham network for 15 years, helped to set up Pratham Books, which has become India's largest children's publisher. My foundation is set up to work in water and sanitation. We work on issues of water and sanitation all over India. And increasingly now I've been focusing on governance-led initiatives and helping to just increase the scope of philanthropy and to put more of a spotlight on the role of the wealthy in India.
Great. Rikin?
In terms of an animal, I think I would choose a hippopotamus, only because I like that word. And also, you know, when you see like those National Geographic type of images of a hippopotamus, you usually see just kind of the eyes of the animal above the surface of the water. And that's what I'd say, you know, as we've heard in Tim and Rohini's kind of remarks, that's usually how we see kind of India as just part of it, and it's very hard to actually understand all of it because there's so much more underneath sort of the surface. And what's exciting about like hippopotami is that as large as they might be, when they kind of hit the land, they can really move really fast, sometimes faster than you might have suspected that was possible given the enormity of the beast. But at the same time, hippopotami are also very territorial, but not on the land, but actually more in the sea. And I think the same is true even in India, is that within the country, there's a lot of different types of factions of various types of nature. And with their large mouths, they tend to be very argumentative and debate with each other about reflecting on sort of what is the way that we want to kind of take ourselves sort of forward.
And tell us a little bit about the work that Digital Green is doing in the context of not the hippopotamus, but
So what we do at Digital Green is that we partner with existing organizations, public, private, civil society, that are involved in agricultural extension types of services, of training farmers on improved practices and techniques to become more sustainable or to improve their productivity. And essentially what we do is we train them on how to produce short videos that are by the community for the community to exchange these practices amongst the community more broadly and improve the efficiency of these existing development efforts that folks are already engaged in.
So a lot of you are working with the government, and you just sort of brought up civil society. And Rohini, you spoke to sort of the importance of governance as a particular space for us to focus on. And I think that a lot that look at India see the government as a critical partner in being able to achieve the social change that we need, as well as civil society. And how do you see the role of the government in the ability to sort of scale and have an impact, or civil society? And then any of you can jump in.
I know at least some people in the audience who will disagree, but I think if you want to scale something, there doesn't seem to be much choice but to go with the government and try to influence the way government rolls out its public services. For something like what Rikin is doing, however, it's wonderful that you don't really need the government at all. You lead this farmer to farmer and it spreads. Some things can be done without the government, but I think, say, if you look at water, or if you look at health, or if you look at education, I think somewhere you have to figure out ways to partner with government to scale. And I think government has been relatively open at all levels, local to the center, to say if somebody wants to innovate outside and help us adopt those things inside, they've been quite open. But as anyone who has worked with government knows, often you take 2 steps forward and then 1 step back and then start over again. Because there are many complex, government is so not, it's not one thing, right? You think of government, there are departments, there are people, governments work in silos, so it's tough, but I don't see how you can avoid working with government, at least at one of the 3 levels, if you want to scale something.
Rikin, do you agree?
Yeah, so yeah, no, I totally agree. And actually we work very closely with the government. So even for our work, where we're trying to get this kind of community to community sharing of practices through videos, all of that infrastructure of how that happens, the government is actually investing in, whether that is in terms of mobilizing sort of women's self-help groups that they begin by introducing microfinance related activities, or whether that is that they have these village level sort of para extension workers who serve as facilitators for making this kind of knowledge exchange possible, or investing financially in like capital costs of like cameras and projectors. All of these things, the government is in the best position to actually be able to invest in these things at scale, and the ability for us to try to institutionalize all of these aspects into their existing programs then is also the story of sustainability.
And Tim?
I couldn't agree more. I think while there are other pathways to scale beyond the government, and it depends on the sector that you're working. Certainly in the sector that we work in, the government has to be involved. And so we partner very closely with the government in India and elsewhere. I'm working with the government is difficult. I mean, it's complex, not monolithic at all. I mean, Rohini said that. But there is a lot of innovation happening. There's so much potential. You can identify those champions and work with champions within the government. So India has such a robust and vibrant civil society. One of the things that I get discouraged about a bit with that civil society is so much of it seems to be not working with the government. That is, seeing the government as the problem and trying to go around them rather than partnering with them and to solve the problems of society.
Do you agree, Rohini?
I think there are so many civil society organizations in India that everything is true about them. I mean, there is a whole group that remains outside the purview of government, decides to be an antagonist to government, and I think that role is quite legitimate, to protest and to show a mirror to government and say we will not work with government. I think that's a legitimate position to bring some issues to the fore. And then there are other people who prefer to take that problem and then help solve it through government. I think all these are legitimate things for civil society actors to do.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and how have you navigated through the challenges? I mean, I know that sometimes when we've gone to philanthropists, and maybe even Rohini can add to this, a lot of funders and foundations feel that why are we funding something that the government should be doing, and let the government figure it out, and why aren't you just doing something off that? And so how do you navigate through both on the funding side or on the government side?
So I think for us, it's been to say that, the investments of philanthropists can be more catalytic to actually demonstrate proofs of concept and to actually evaluate whether those proofs of concept are valuable in providing some sort of impact that then the government can be able to take to scale. That's what we find is that the challenge for a government is that they don't always have flexible resources to be able to innovate and to improve sort of their existing programs. But if you're able to kind of have some program demonstrated, then they are able to kind of translate that into their existing sorts of systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. The government knows how to put a lot of resources behind something. Once it decides, my goodness, once the government decides to do something, they can roll it out at a kind of scale which nobody else can possibly do. But when you innovate outside government, and if you want to scale it up within government, what you innovate, how you innovate must be done with that scaling in mind, because government cannot scale in the way that civil society can. So often what happens is the pilot succeeds and the scale up fails. So more and more the lesson is, if you want it to go through government, what are you going to actually showcase? How are you going to innovate? You have to be able to innovate in a way that government processes can adopt it better. Mm-hmm. So, for example, there are some things which are much more amenable for civil society actors to do, where you need moral leadership, where you need communities to come together. Governments can't do that sort of thing. Sometimes this building up demand, for example, government is not very good at that. So we should be very clear what it is we expect the Indian government at all levels to do, and what should remain with civil society and what should remain with the markets. So I think those are the lessons really that have to be learned quickly.
And Tim, in terms of Landesa, do you find that there's a significant role that the community needs to play versus where the government can provide support? Do you see differences between India and some of the other countries you might be in terms of the government's role?
Yeah, well, there certainly are roles for the community to play, and they are playing them in many cases. So I don't see a big difference in terms of the relative roles of the community and the government in India as in other places. And I agree also that with what Rohini said, is there are legitimate roles for civil society to antagonize, to essentially create that demand on government. My comment before about civil society is I think sometimes people get into a mindset that it's hopeless, that government is hopelessly inefficient, they can't innovate, they can't do anything with high quality, and I just don't accept that. And I think there's lots of evidence to the contrary. But I find sometimes within India and in other countries too, within the United States as well, this kind of this discouragement that leads to apathy, and that's what I think becomes problematic.
And if we kind of reflect on, and you all talked about the complexity and the challenges of functioning in India, and then you have to work with the government to really scale. What is it that sort of keeps you motivated in terms of whether it's optimism or that you're going to be achieving impact? You know, there was a lot of hype and excitement around this particular new government. I know everybody here is asking me, what do you think of Modi? What do you think of Modi? What's your take right now? And what is it that keeps you motivated? And then I'm going to open it up for questions.
Well, what keeps me motivated are interacting with those that we are trying to serve, and whether they've actually received land rights, and you see poor women who now have this dignity and this status and this hope about the future. There's nothing like it, but it can be equally motivating to find those who are still seeking that, right? But it's that interaction at the grassroots is what keeps me motivated. In terms of the change in government, I mean, in our issue, I think it's less maybe about what party's leading the country. It's more about the revenue department and the land governance at a more local level.
Mm-hmm. Rohini, for you?
What keeps me motivated? Well, what keeps me motivated is that I want to live in a society where there is not quite so much injustice, and where there is much more access to the kind of things that I had access to. And there are ways to do that, and there are so many people engaged in that, and just watching the strength in adversity that people in India show, and all that keeps you going every day. About the new government, well, it's early days, and I know people, what I worry about is that, like many other countries, India is getting more polarized, and that is worrying. But I believe that we do have a very strong democracy, and so long as we can keep that alive in every which way, we're going to be just fine, no matter which government.
Yeah. Rikin?
I think, yeah, for me, similarly, I think, just seeing how, small incremental changes that people sort of apply and learn for themselves kind of builds their own confidence that they can do more. And you see that across sectors, whether it's agriculture or urban communities, the gains that people are realizing as, maybe fractional as you might consider them right now, are serving to give people the confidence that they can go much farther. And that's really exciting. And I think with regard to the new government, it is still kind of very early days, and there's a lot of pomp and circumstance probably with regard to where they are right now, just because it's still very early. But I think what's been exciting for us in terms of the relationship that we've had with government over time has been that the pace and the way in which we worked with it has sort of changed. And it's worked out well, I guess, in terms of how we've been able to take our own work kind of forward. So in the previous government, that's when we began sort of scaling up our work with the government, and there were champions who actually were very excited and taking ownership of really scaling up our work, and that really helped to drive sort of the approach internally into the government system. But then, it also had some of the flip side, which was that there was a lot of like central management of that partnership, and even how they would sort of roll things out at the state level. Now with the current government, they're moving into a more cooperative federalism type of structure that the new government talks about. And that's great because it kind of puts more power into the hands of the states to actually see how can we use, say, an approach like ours or many others to suit our unique kind of situations. And I think that's worked out really well. If we were in that situation in the beginning, it would have been a much probably harder process for us to get into the system. Because we had that centralization initially, we got into the system at a national level, and now we can kind of focus our efforts more locally.
Great, thank you. We're going to open it up for questions. Yes, go ahead on the left back, yeah.
Hi, I'm Alicia Miranda. I'm with the Thomson Reuters Foundation. I had the great pleasure to attend Dasra Philanthropy Week last month in Mumbai, and you guys did a fantastic job, and particularly on the last day when you all were launching your governance fund, there was a lot of talk of funding that within India from Indian philanthropists. Your organization does a lot to build philanthropy in India, and the rest of you are involved in that in different respects. And so it really left me with the question that I didn't get to ask then, so I'm going to ask it now, which is what is the role, where is the best place that you think organizations, whether funders or people like what we do who are kind of connecting, but that are sitting outside of India, how can we really be supporting what's going on in the work that you're doing without, kind of interfering with other efforts that are happening?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I guess that's why we're all here. There have been rapid changes in the way outside investments in India have been made in the last 10-15 years. So a lot of the kind of work that philanthropy or investments from outside were doing, say in the human rights space, in the governance space, I think all that cannot be done very much anymore. I think government is coming down hard on foreign money coming into India in areas, in sensitive areas such as governance or human rights, rightly or wrongly. So I think those opportunities have changed, but other opportunities are opening up. So whether it's Omidyar, whether it's the Gates Foundation, and the Michael and Susan Den, many such entities are investing in some for-profit and non-profit spaces in India. And I think especially the new social entrepreneurs who are doing quite a lot of innovative work, I think do require capital, and I think that's where bringing best practices from somewhere else and scaling them up at a slightly larger scale. In India, when we talk of pilots, we're talking about 500,000 people to begin with or something like that. It gives you the opportunity for really large evidence creation, and there is many spaces that I think all of you can come and support work that's happening or seed some new work that's not yet happening. So whether it's in data, whether it's in some forms of ecology work, in education, I think health applications, diagnostics, so many things are just waiting for partnerships and innovation to happen. So I think the opportunities are immense. Would you agree?
Totally agree. And I think even like the government is very receptive about like ideas that you might be able to bring both, from the outside in, and also, to think about even ideas from India that might go outside. And even the government of India is working in places like Ethiopia in terms of trying to share best practices related to how they mobilize women's self-help groups, for example. And so there's a good opportunity kind of from an international perspective to kind of foster more of these types of bridges.
Tim, yeah.
I couldn't say it better. I do think one has to be careful coming from outside India, not to think that you have an answer for India, because there's rather the approach should be to find what's happening in India and support good things, because there's so many great things happening in India, and I think the world actually probably has much more to learn from India than India has to learn from the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had a question back up there, yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
A little louder.
Hello?
Yep.
Perfect, okay, hello. Kim Meredith, Stanford Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society. Hello, Rohini, hello, Tim. Question for you. I don't know very much about India, but we've been doing work in China. And I often get questions and would love to have some of your insights. China has lifted more people out of bottom of the pyramid poverty really than any country, probably over the past 20 years. They are not a democracy. India is a democracy and is still really struggling. Sort of, how do we, to me, if India's at the crossroads, it would be some very big lift of this bottom of the pyramid. So while I hear you talking about government being receptive, in my mind it's also about action, moving from ideas and philosophy to actually creating the change. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, because it certainly causes me to question, like, do you need a democracy to lift people out of poverty? And either way, there are still human rights issues in China, there's still human rights and social justice issues in India. So I really throw that out to get a few more insights, because it's a question that comes up a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Rohini.
Well, those are big questions. If you look at government data, depending on which government data you look at, we have lifted 300 million people out of absolute poverty in the last 15 years. Only 600 million more or so to go. No, I'm joking. I think there's no doubt whatsoever that a lot of change and progress on the ground. New kinds of poverty is coming up actually as rapid change happens. So we are seeing the feminization of poverty perhaps and the urbanization of poverty. But as many people here who are working on the ground will tell you, you go to in South India for example, you go almost anywhere, you will not see absolute poverty like you could 20 years ago. One of my gurus, Al Fernandez, says, come with me and show me. And even if you go into Bihar or Madhya Pradesh, you can see a serious change on the ground. It's a country on the move. We have 150 to 200 million people migrating within India looking for livelihoods. That's creating a lot of change. Today with government planning huge schemes for really structurally changing the way people access services, I think in the next 5 to 10 years we will see a lot more of absolute poverty coming down. It's going to throw up new challenges. But I don't see how we can do that without the democracy part, because I think unlike China, though we are slower, we also don't make very large mistakes very quickly. So I think there are trade-offs to that, and I think it's our democracy and diversity actually that allow us to cope with so many complex challenges in locally relevant ways. So I have great faith that things are changing for the better in India on the ground, and there's lots of evidence for that. If you look at the demographic, we have two humps. So South India has already reached its own replacement of population replacement, and I think North India is going to come. So we are going to reach our peak in another 20 years, and we are going to have to face those challenges for the next 15 years, but I think we're going to be well placed.
Tim or Rikin? China versus India?
Yeah, so we operate in both India and China, and I think one has to be careful about making quick judgments about the relationship between democracy and poverty alleviation. So, but I do think government has a major role to play, and the biggest role they have to play is actually in creating an enabling environment. It's less about implementing programs than it is policy change around enabling environment. So if you look at the experience of China, I think, well, a couple of things I would observe. I think you shouldn't just judge it from 1980 or 1990, rather go back earlier. And China came from a very low baseline in part because the government made huge policy mistakes, I would say, in the 50s and 60s, by the way, that led to the largest famine by far on the planet in the 20th century, 35 million incremental deaths or something. It was government failure. And that type of failure would have unlikely happened in a democracy. So one, they came from a low baseline and were kind of correcting things, but it wasn't about the government necessarily pulling the people out of poverty. It was the government, I would argue, creating an enabling environment and getting out of the way, and creating an enabling environment which gave people opportunity to get out of poverty. So I think how it will be sustained over time, it's more likely to happen well and sustainably within a country that has strong democratic institutions. And whether it's democracy first and economic development later, or economic development first leading to democracy, there's lots of literature on that, but I wouldn't bet against democracy.
Yes, Raymond.
I have a practical question. I'm sorry, Raymond Guthrie from the Skoll Foundation. Rohini, I'd love to get your insight on some of the things you've learned from deploying money in India that someone that sits in Palo Alto wouldn't know.
Sorry, I didn't hear that so well.
I said I would love to get your insight in terms of what you've learned from being a foundation working in India that someone that sits in Palo Alto wouldn't know.
What have I learned that someone in Palo Alto wouldn't know?
Or what would you want to tell somebody in Palo Alto that that you're giving in this way in your experience, what would you want them to be exposed to or think about?
Palo Alto.
California.
Well,
Get out.
do they know about India? They're in their own wonderful bubble. But as a foundation, it's an incredibly humbling experience, and I mean that, because you go out there and you find so many people who have great ideas, commitment, passion, and all you really have to do is support them and then help them in the way that they want. And so it's not about us. The kind of partners we have, say, in water and sanitation around the country, they have a very relevant contextual answer to their very local problems. And I don't know, we've been supporting all sorts of very exciting things in groundwater, for example, participatory groundwater management. It's a whole different paradigm at looking at sustaining your groundwater resources by creating social institutions. I would say that, so we've learned from the people that we are supporting that you can be very creative and innovative at a local level. And I think that's really it, that support local creativity, innovation, and commitment. That's my big lesson of all.
Yeah, Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz Ellers, the Globalist Local Fund. I just wanted to follow up on that. Raymond, I've known DOSRA, the organization DOSRA that Neera is representing, for 11 years now, I think. And as I'm a funder, and as I've considered over those years how to engage in India, it was really clear to me that unless I moved to India and spent a decade there, I was going to need to partner with a local partner. And ultimately, I partnered with DOSRA, joining one of their funding collaboratives. And Neera, you might want to explain at some point more about what you all do. But I would encourage folks, funders, to really, especially when you're entering a new country, to really seek out local knowledge and, if possible, local co-funders, which is what the Globalist Local Fund did. We, as a collaborative, partnered with one of DOSRA's collaboratives around early childhood malnutrition, which is a pilot that's meant for the government to pick up and scale. And we could never have achieved that on our own.
There's 2 questions down. Thanks, Liz. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Josh Carliner, Healthcare Without Harm. So when I think about India at the crossroads, I sort of end up thinking about the development model and energy policy. And I think the crossroads seem multiple in that regard. India is pursuing an energy development policy that is fundamentally based on expanding the number of coal-fired power plants in the country, and that has impacts on human health in the cities and in the communities where the plants are built. So of the top 20 most polluted cities in terms of PM 2.5 in the world, 10 are in India. It has impacts on the global climate. It has impacts on water and water resources. It has impacts on land use patterns and land rights. And even as the Modi government is also committing to expanding its renewable energy, that is also, they're looking at mega projects, mega solar projects and mega wind projects, which also have impacts on land rights. And it also has impacts on the country's democracy in that there's been quite a chilling effect in civil society as they've sort of defined energy policy as a national security issue. And so I'm just kind of curious, if you guys can comment a little bit about your sense about how energy plays into the crossroads.
Yeah, go ahead, Rikin.
So yeah, I can't directly address sort of the questions regarding sort of energy policy, I'd say, but I'd say that you're kind of right that with regard to sort of the new government and even just kind of generally sort of India's development progress, has moved into a situation where the government is taking a larger role in a lot of sort of spheres, whether that be energy or agriculture, other sorts of aspects. And as a result, you do see that in certain sectors, like even in agriculture, civil society NGOs are starting to not so much have a role. In certain areas of the country, like in southern India, there's really not very many NGOs at this point that are involved in agricultural development types of activities. The government is kind of more centrally driving a lot of the sort of agenda. Now we'll have to see what changes kind of in the new government's space of kind of cooperative federalism. But at one level, the reason why this is happening is because of like sort of the interest of the people, right? Like the people now feel that we're now in a mode where we need to kind of see more larger scale kind of like development efforts, and that's why they voted kind of for this new government, not to the extreme of like say like what type of government China might be versus India, but it is for one where there's been a sort of a development of sufficient education and optimism within sort of the larger population that's what they're kind of interested in seeing. And the effects might be sort of the type that Rohini said, right? Which is like maybe in this new government, like they might invest in some of these like larger mega programs, and we might see like sort of the repercussions of maybe some of the mistakes that are susceptible when you kind of go down that track. But that's the track that we've chosen kind of as a people. And I think even in China's sort of trajectory, it's sort of maybe somehow parallels kind of like the India one at some level, although very different, in the sense that we're currently in a situation where there's an interest in saying that, hey, government should develop, right? That's kind of why people voted for Modi based on his sort of experience in Gujarat, the country. But moving forward, there's probably already some signs that people are going to be wanting to move more toward like a market-centric sort of development paradigm. And that's still kind of nascent in certain sectors, like in agriculture or in energy, right? We're not yet there. Definitely like still state sort of managed situation. But just like China, I think that sort of transition is probably in the wings just because of where people are kind of interested in moving it. I don't know.
No, I'm not an expert, but you're right that the energy question is going to be a big one. And it will be interesting to see whether what decentralized off-grid solutions we can create, because I don't see how we are going to reach everybody with a centralized grid, and we need a basket of energy solutions. And we're really watching that space, because the kind of mega power projects that are planned, on the ground there's going to be, when it hits the road, when the rubber hits the road, there's going to be a lot of conflict. And we have to see, the government is still way behind its energy plans. So it'll be interesting to watch. I do hope we can innovate an energy solution for India that is different. We cannot follow the path of the rest of the world. We just don't have that luxury. So that space is to be watched. There are many entrepreneurs in that space, and that's really a space to invest in.
Tim, do you want to add anything, or should I?
Well, I'm also not an expert, but again, democratic institutions and an active civil society, it means at least you have a better feedback loop, I think, in India than you do have in China and maybe other countries too. So we can't completely bet on that feedback loop, but it at least gives some reason for optimism and hope.
I was going to just draw in Vineet to chat. I know Rohini's spoken a bit about sort of innovation and being able to come up with off-grid ideas, and I know that the impact investing space has been funding a lot of stuff out there, and I know Michael's here from Simpa Networks and others. If you can provide, maybe just add to the perspective in terms of this question, but also this more market-based, is that where we're going to move, and do you see the kind of stuff that you're doing impacting India at Crossroads?
Yeah, well, I am myself at Crossroads, so take it from there. I actually started off, just a quick background, I actually have been investing in this space for 17 years. Started with investing $10,000. Over a period, I've gone up to 10 million, now reaching to $30 million in each deal. I think the question that really, which has bothered me is actually, am I, or most of us who are playing in this so-called impact investing social enterprise space, pleasing ourselves, or are we actually trying to make a difference on the ground? And I started off saying you need to invest in $50,000, $100,000, really nurture entrepreneurs, take them forward. But then after 17 years, I have very few companies to show who have actually reached $500, $100 million, $200 million. Given that the challenge is so large, that if the challenge is so large and if my money is working really well and the entrepreneurs are so good, then why are we not really solving the problems at scale? And my ultimate conclusion after 15, 17 years is that most of our challenges are not intellectual challenges. They are actually physical challenges. So for example, open defecation, 60%. I can have as much as you want intellectual debate about how to solve it, but without putting a toilet there, you're not going to ever solve it. So how do you actually do that? And the more I have thought about it, the more I have realized is if I am not able to put around a significant amount of capital in an entrepreneur, build a very large team, capacitate him so that he can actually deal with the challenge, there is no way we are able to move any needle on the 60% to take it down to even 40%. And that question is where I think the interaction with the government comes in. So the new government in India wants to actually clean up the country. And so they actually want to work with social entrepreneurs as well. But the contracts that the government want you to act on is something that my social entrepreneur has taken 10 years to do. They want to do it in 6 months. Where do you get the kind of management? Where do you get the kind of team? And I think really, therefore, a lot of the debate about making a difference and a lot of heart beating that chest beating a lot of us as impact investors do, I think we are just too small and insignificant in the scheme of things, the challenges that we have. Not to depress anybody, it just tells you that I was actually talking to somebody outside in the India breakfast thing, and he was saying, my God, so much money moving around here. So I said, we need to actually tell this money that we have huge opportunities to deploy it and actually made a significant change. On ground in India, if you have the capability and real capability to dish out the money. I've been raising money for 17 years, and I can tell you, for all the talk that we do, if people can start signing their checks faster, I think the change will happen faster. So I'll not go into that. I actually seriously believe that amount of talking and amount of signing of checks are not really correlated. A lot of concentration and discussion should come around on that side. The challenges are there. I mean, we've known about it for hundreds of years, so they're not going to go away. Let's actually try to convince people to sign faster, or maybe do electronic transfers. That's it.
Do you guys have any comments? Yeah? Do you have any comments? Rohini, I know everybody asks you, no, not particularly on the electronic transactions, but just in general, sort of his take on, and I'll come to you back there after this, just your take on, I know everybody asks around impact investing, and you sort of mentioned Omidyar and Gates and folks doing both and having that flexibility. Do you see it as catalytic in this whole sort of development agenda, and any of you?
I think you are seeing a lot of entrepreneurs coming up in the public services spaces, water, sanitation, health, housing, education, energy, where government was not able to really provide the services, the market players are coming in and getting some investment and support. It's tricky because, Vineet, would you agree with me, the ecosystem around that, and there is some policy fuzziness still, but I think we'll have to go through that to see what enabling ecosystems have to be developed. There's not that much clarity, I think, in India about the role of markets in these spaces. So far, it was either civil society or governments that were expected to deliver public services. There is some sort of shift. How that shift is going to play out and whether it can scale, I think, is a question that is unanswered yet. There's a lot of ecosystem build up to be done around it in terms of policy, in terms of capacity. I think so.
And do you guys, Tim or Rikin, agree with Vineet that it is about that there's a real lack of capacity to execute on the ground at the scale of what we need? Do you see that in your own organizations? If they dumped millions of dollars with you guys, would that be a constraint for you, or do you see that in others?
Yeah, there's definitely I think a gap of kind of capacity in not just organizations of social enterprises, but even of the government or say of the private sector, either of which, if we're expecting to be able to scale or sustain many of these sort of impacts programs, will they be able to do so? I don't think so, right? We're not yet at that stage. And so there often is the situation where the government is saying that, hey, I want you to scale this program to some, exponential sort of degree, and you're not able to kind of like meet it. But then the question is the enabling environment or the ecosystem really in place to actually not just like the social enterprise or something that might have like some new widget or some new idea or policy? Is that what's the limiting factor? I don't think so. Actually, I think what the larger sort of like issue is the government or the private sector, if that's what's going to long-term make the longer sustained and scaled sort of impact, are those sort of organizations ready to handle it? And I think not. And that's where we have like a larger role to play, is to actually build kind of their capacity to be able to know how to do so. And I think we have, as social entrepreneurs, have a larger role to play in terms of thinking about how our programs can not just be like that one widget, but can be like more of that sort of more comprehensive sort of program that, as Rohini said initially, is something that either the public sector or the private can actually help carry forward. And think about all the nuances that are required for it.
Why don't you give a real example from your work? For the agricultural extension services used to be very much in the government domain. There's almost no extension services left on the ground, and that's created an opportunity for you. Why don't you tell a real example of how is the government taking some of that back?
Sure. So in our case, we're using sort of videos that are produced by the community for the community to exchange agricultural practices. Now, how does this whole system work is largely kind of two primary things. One is sort of social organizations of the community having come together and been mobilized. And then two, that there be some sort of frontline village level sort of force of like facilitators to be able to make that whole exchange of producing and sharing knowledge possible. Now, in the case of the government, if we're going to institutionalize this either in the government or in the private sector, these two building blocks kind of need to already be in place and need to have some strength with regard to them. If there's no like sort of groupings of community members or there's no village level facilitators, we have nothing to kind of do. And the same is true even in the private sector. As much as we might think like, hey, market-based approaches might be like, the future, the private sector, at least in India, is still in a transitional phase where even the largest company that works like directly with farmers like Pepsi, they at maximum they work with 100,000 farmers, which is like a drop in the bucket, right, in India. So if you're going to be working with farmers, you're going to need to probably work with the government. But the problem with the government is that it's an uneven story even there, in that in certain states, they have like sort of mobilized groups and they have these village level facilitators, and in others they don't. And so for us to roll out our program, we have to focus on those sort of that are ripe for taking on our approach.
Yeah, go ahead back there, yes. I'll come to you next.
Hi, I'm Navroz Mehta, founder and CEO of Mela Artisans. And I wanted to follow up on what Vineet said, actually, and also what Les said about an example of what we are doing is we are causing, what we started, my daughter and I started a company to help artisanal communities throughout India with empowerment and upliftment with many of the groups that we were working with. And to many of the points made, I think I've been in the States for 30 years, but I grew up in Bombay. And the funding and the partners that we needed to do to make this a very scalable, multi-channel approach, which selling beautiful handicrafts that are made in India in a very consistent way, was to get funding on the ground in India and to work with local partners. And that's why we partnered with Avishkar. Avishkar funded our Series A. And I think that type of on-the-ground work with India has allowed us to really have a strong sourcing partnership, ground level network in India, but at the same time be in stores like Neiman's and Bloomingdale's and Bergdorf and create a mainstream brand. So that type of a partnership where you have on the ground work in the US, but have funding and partners in India can be successful and we are scaling very fast. So I just wanted to use that as a good example of how you can have very strong partners in India to cause that type of a scalable entity.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Yes. My name is Josh Goldstein. I was the Center for Financial Inclusion at Axion, and what I'm working on and helping to lead a global initiative is to make financial service providers in India and in other countries disability friendly and inclusive. And we're having quite a bit of success in that area, I agree with the gentleman that local partnership is key. All disability organizations say nothing about us without us. So if you don't understand the local environment, you're not going to do well. But to the issue of the government versus the private sector, I mean, it's really a mixed bag. So India is a country with the rule of law. It's quite robust in some ways. On the other hand, with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which India was an early signer and ratifier of, the reality on the ground speaks very differently. So some government bureaucrat read, okay, we have to put in ramps. Well, if you look at some of the ramps in Bangalore, for example, they're like mini pyramids that not only can you not go up it in a wheelchair, you couldn't walk up it. So some government official had took the mandate, we have to put in ramps. So you have to break down attitudinal barriers, you have to change ideas, and I think that's more likely to come from NGO and private parties. But I think there's an enormous opportunity there, there's an enormous goodwill, and I think for something to become normative, you really, where it will be spread out and the government will take it over and scale it up, you first have to prove the concept that this is something that is valuable to people. On sanitation, for example, I mean, one of the biggest complaints that women make in India who have a disability, orthopedic disability, they can't use the toilets. So, is that included in design thinking as you build out sanitation? It's incredibly important to make a more inclusive society. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't do so well on that. Thank you for reminding us. It's very true.
I have about 10 minutes left, so if I can urge you to also ask questions of my esteemed guests.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to highlight one of the things which I think is very important.
Can you give who you are? Where you're from?
Sorry.
Just
My
quickly.
name is Manoj Bhatt, and I work with Goodweave in
Okay.
India. And the issue is the informal sector and the workers working in that sector. The civil society groups have been working on various thematic issues for last many years. But I feel that because 86% of the production is happening in the informal sector in India, the attention we give collectively from the government as well as from the civil society is very, very less on this issue of how to improve the working conditions of workers in the informal sector. And particularly because when we are focusing, our government is focusing on Make in India, how that is, going to help the workers in informal sector, particularly as Rohini mentioned that there is huge migration happening, within India, and I guess a majority of this migration is unskilled workers.
So let's ask them. What do you guys think of the informal sector as important in sort of the development agenda? And do you see it there?
It's very important. Just to be a bit provocative, perhaps, I think one of the answers for the informal sector is asking the root kind of upstream question, why are there so many in the informal sector? And I think part of that answer is because India's labor standards for the formal sector are higher than they should be in many places. There's a lot of, as I look at legislation in India, and I'm not an expert on the labor legislation, but I think there's been a lot of pro-poor legislation passed in India that in fact has had dramatic negative perverse consequences. And I think that's true in labor legislation. I think it's true in land legislation. A lot of legislation passed to protect the poor ultimately presses more people into informality. And so helping the people in informality is needed, but thinking more at the root causes, why are there so many informality? How can we bring more informal into the formal? And I think that is about changing the enabling environment.
Yeah, we do suffer from the unintended consequences of very good intentions in every sphere. But I think this question of the informal sector is being tackled head on now with a lot of changes in the offing. So it's tricky though, because look at say the human waste economy, okay? Urban human waste is being collected and is being dumped onto farmers' fields The farmers are paying for this. It's good for fertilizer. It's not safe. The protocols are bad, but it's a thriving business around India. Now, this is completely unregulated. Now, you start to regulate this sector, and if you don't get it right, you're going to kill the actual, the benefits without keeping. So it's going to be a tricky transition from the unregulated economy to the regulated, but that's the space to watch.
Yeah. Yes, Lynn.
I'm Lynn Smitham from the Kiowa Trust, and we fund exclusively in India. I'm based in the UK. One of the questions that I get asked a lot by people in the UK when I talk about the work that we do is about the corruption question in India. And my question is, what can we do as individuals, donors, social entrepreneurs, intermediaries, to really change the corruption, but also change the perception?
I mean, I think, we work very closely with the government, and we work very closely with them, even procuring all sorts of equipment and things, right? Material things. And we have not actually encountered any sort of corruption. And, it's partially based on who you work with and at what level, and are those systems, transparent or not? Where they're not, obviously there's, avenues for people to be corrupt, and usually those places, at least, in our limited experience that we have had, it's usually the corruption tends to happen in not so much the departments that we work with, where they're working with us and therefore have an interest in actually trying to make some sort of change happen, but probably more so in those departments where they have no interest in making any change and don't even want to engage with an organization such as ourselves, right? So I think it's almost like there's a self-selection of who you work with and who's going to be willing to kind of work with you. If you're able to convince them that this is maybe a useful idea, then and they take it on and they take the ownership, then you're not going to see so much. I do think that there is of course a lot of corruption at various other levels. But at some other level, I also do think that there is that perception thing that needs to be sort of corrected. And what we find, at least in our work, is to say, how can we use sort of the data and information that we collect to kind of make these sometimes black box type of systems more open for people to be able to see. So for example, even for the village level sort of extension agents who we work with, who are part of sort of the government system, we show all of their records of what are the activities that they've sort of accomplished and what are the payments that are due to them. And it helps in both ways, not just kind of from the corruption angle, but also make sure that these individuals get paid, because that's sometimes also a big problem, is on the flip side that people just don't even get what's due to them. So I think it's more about trying to probably open up that black box of some of these systems, and also to say that there is that perception issue of saying that if you self-select to parts of the government that are receptive to new ideas, that probably they are going to be less corrupt, but we need to be able to show that in real ways.
A lot is happening in this space in India. For example, just shining the light on what's happening. For example, the Asar report that Pratham has been doing for 10 years has allowed people to know what's happening in education. Some of the right to information has shed a lot of light on what's actually happening within government. Many new entrepreneurs are setting up data sites where they take government data and make it much more visible to people. They make it much more graphic and visual so that people know what's happening. There are many, many innovative ways in which this big thing called corruption is being tackled, and there are many ways for funders to support, bring innovative ideas from outside and help them to be put together in India. And I think this space has really opened up quite a bit. There is a demand now. There is a demand to know how government is functioning, and there are many ways to put up a mirror to that, and many innovative things are happening. Would you want to add to that?
Well, I could, but there's so much rich experience in the audience that I think it hasn't been drawn upon. I mean, I see Bunker and Joe and Madhav and others.
Call on them.
Yeah.
Rohini and Madhav.
Yeah, who spent a career and have a lot more experience in this. So
Joe, Rukmini, Madhav, anybody? I see you guys. I see you on your phones. But feel free to add in. There was a, yes, go ahead.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm John Littlefield with Wash Advocates. That's a nonprofit lobbying group for water, sanitation, and hygiene in Washington, D.C. First of all, I want to thank you guys for a real grown-up conversation. I don't like scalability. I like scale. And this conversation involves working at governments to give us all the opportunity to start at scale, at least conceptually. And that's really interesting for me, whether we're looking at water or sanitation or energy or financial literacy. So first of all, kudos. Two quick questions. If philanthropists want to be more catalytic in their efforts in India, I wonder if you guys could get just a touch more granular on where those leverage points are, where the jujitsu points are, union, state, municipal. I've been to India 3 or 4 times. I can still barely find it on a map. I like the hippopotamus business that Rikin talked about there. I've seen just a little ear or something like that, even after several weeks there. So the leverage points I'm interested in. Secondly, with regard to NRIs, non-resident Indians in the United States, in recent conversations I've had with a number of them, they express an interest, a heightened interest is my impression, in being more strategic in their philanthropy. And I bet that's, so do you have any advice for non-resident Indian philanthropists, getting back to this Palo Alto question, how they can engage more effectively with the current government at whatever scale? And I bet Dasra would have at least a partial answer to that question as well. Thanks very much.
Go ahead. Yeah, sure. So I'll start. So I think there's realizing the complexity and the challenges of going to India when you're coming from the outside. I think we're seeing a real mushrooming of facilitators, industry facilitators, whether in the philanthropic space or the impact investing space. And so I think there's now vehicles that you can participate in, like our giving circles, or you can go online and come through Give India and other portals. So I think there's more and more opportunities for philanthropists to participate. I think there are learning journeys and learning programs. And so we're ourselves as facilitators getting our act together to be able to help, I guess, NRI folks to come and do more. I think there is, even from sort of USAID and the Aspen Institute, are creating products for which diaspora can participate, whether in impact investing or provide loan guarantees or philanthropic investments. But I think there is a greater role for us to play as facilitators in bringing more information about what NGOs exist on the ground, who's doing what kind of work, and providing that due diligence so that we can just get through this transparency piece and say that there are great organizations on the ground. I think we're getting there. I think for NRIs, it's kind of like just give and take a risk would be my advice. But but I don't know if you guys have anything to. We had a question down here.
I think that if you can work with governments, you were talking about levers. I think working with state governments offer huge opportunities now for philanthropy. You can work on education outcomes, health outcomes, and state governments are open to those kinds of innovation at scale. And today we are in a better position than ever before to actually design for scale. I think today's technologies, digital technologies especially, allow you to design for scale, and there's a lot of opportunity to invest in that design element, that technology, to allow, in any sector, to allow us to take solutions to scale.
Hi there, my name is Yin Liu, I'm from the Khan Academy. Khan Academy has seen just tremendous growth in India over the past year alone, 300% growth. And we're really thinking about more strategically bringing more roots to India. And my question is, in part of our being able to be successful in India, sustainability is a big problem that we're trying to solve. And what are your thoughts, and folks around the room as well, on this new CSR law that's passed with corporations dedicating 2% of the net profits to CSR? How do you think that'll play out with governments? How do you think that'll play out with nonprofits in the coming years?
Does anyone in the audience want to answer that?
So the Megan Fallone from Barefoot College, I work with Bunker. One of the I think there's some fascinating things about the CSR arrangement that now exists in India. For those of you who don't know, it was originally written in a quite strict and stern way, and recently that language has been rolled back a little bit, so now it's much more of a recommendation, and that they've sort of backtracked on the penalty of not complying. So that's unfortunate, I think, for a lot of reasons. But the great thing for those who don't understand how it works is you must, as an organization, prove your ability to implement at scale. And actually, in many ways, that you already have made those links to government and are able to work in very strong multilateral private sector, public sector partnerships. So there is really the guarantee on the part of the CSR investor that they're going to be met with a pool of people who are able to actually take their dollars and move at scale. So I think that one of the things that we're concerned about is that a lot of companies are sort of looking at ways to keep that money in-house, as opposed to really going to partner with the organizations who can really drive impact and have a proven network across India.
So I think what we're seeing from Duster's perspective is right now there's been a whole rush to try to be compliant, as she was saying. So everyone's running around trying to figure out, are we compliant or not? But I think the reality is we are seeing a significant increase in the amount of funding, because everybody's got to top up to this 2%. What we've seen in the last few months is financial services are the first folks stepping up and saying, we're just going to move to 2%. For Khan Academy, if you're in education, it's like by far the most popular sector for everybody to want to move into first. So in terms of that, it's great for you guys. But we're running out of time, and so I'd love for you guys each, if you could just leave us with some words of wisdom and some advice and things to think about.
Bet on India. It may be moving slowly. I started out pointing out problems, in part because I think it's really important for us all, whether we're outsiders or insiders, to recognize not only the fabulous strengths and the great progress that India's made, but be very honest also about the remaining problems. But I'm incredibly optimistic. I think we need more people from the outside, more capital, more talent invested in India's problems, and I think we'll come back here in 10 years and marvel at how much progress has been made on the social progress index too.
Great. Yeah, I'd second that. I think we're at an inflection point of sorts. I think a lot has been invested already by many actors in many spaces in India. It feels like the time is ripe for big things to happen. And if we don't get it right in India, it's awful for India, but it's going to be terrible for the rest of the world too. So any which way, all of us can work on some of these problems and innovate our way and really build also social capacity. Why are we doing this? Invest in people, invest in communities. I think that's the way to go. But I personally, in spite of everything, I really genuinely feel optimistic that things are going to be better.
Yeah, I echo that for sure. I think what's exciting is even outside of the social space itself, but in the IT space, right, where so much investment is coming into India at this point. It's obviously still nascent compared to Silicon Valley, but it is nascent and it's growing very quickly. That serves as a base of inspiration for so many people, not just for us to say hey, what are the lessons or technology tools that we can take from that IT revolution into development or something, but actually amongst these communities that we work with, even in the most interior parts of the country, they're so inspired by sort of the growth of these sectors and the opportunities that are ahead, and that itself, creates sort of at some level a self-fulfilling prophecy at some level, right? You can't discount people's sort of motivation and confidence in themselves, and I think the more that we're able to kind of share those types of stories of sort of positive type of development as opposed to regressive ones, the more likely that we'll end up in a positive place.
Great. So thank you very much for all of your time. I'm changing the title from India at Crossroads to India at an Inflection Point. I think we're all in this room full of optimism. Thank you for spending your morning with us.